Good evening. My name is Bob Graves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. It's good to be back with you again on this Sunday evening. I'm a little tired today, but that's because I've been having a blast this weekend. I went to New York City to go to Carnegie Hall. I had some friends there who have this awesome band, and they were playing there, and I got a chance to see the performance as well as spend some time with them at a party afterwards. And then I had to grab a bus that was extremely uncomfortable to ride in for some reason this time, and got home at around 5 in the morning, fell asleep, and so I'm a bit groggy, but I'm here, and it's good to be back with you. I went to see a band called 1964, The Tribute, and if any of you know me, I'm a incurable Beatles fan, so it was great to go see them. Tonight, I'm happy to have with me as a guest a person who I've known of her for a while, but I've never really gotten to know her personally, and I'm looking forward to doing some of that. So I want to introduce you tonight to my guest, Aida Calder. So Aida, welcome to my show here.
Well, I'm glad to be on, Bob. Thanks for inviting me.
And we also have a friend in common that you know very well, and I only know him casually. And I did want to take some time to just talk a little bit about Darren Hufford. He's the author of the book The Misunderstood God, and also one of the main people behind something called the Free Believers Network. And of course, you've worked with that and helped him with that quite a bit. And but lately, and it's interesting. This is the first show where I'm having a guest for this year. And when I first started the show, I was hoping to have Darren as a guest, but unfortunately, he was quite ill. And I know that you know somewhat about that. Could you give us a bit of an update on how Darren has been doing?
Okay, well, Darren was in the hospital in ICU for about 3 months and came home the beginning of December. He is better. He is getting better. It's been a slow process, but he is far from being well. He is able now to start moving a little bit. He has to learn how to walk again because he was in bed for so long and inactive. So he's learning how to do that, walking a little bit without crutches and without a wheelchair, very sluggish from what I understand, very slow, but he is doing that. Um, so overall, he's doing better, but the problem that is really holding him back from being totally well is he's having problems with nausea and vomiting.
Yeah.
And it's very extreme from what Angie's been sharing and telling me, and she's really concerned because he has lost 17 pounds since he came home. And Darren's not too big to start. I mean, he's a tall man, but he's
Right.
never was overweight to start with. So 17 pounds for him is huge, and he can't keep anything down. So that's a major concern. Thursday, he is going for another test. He's going for an upper GI, and they're hoping to see exactly what's going on. There's some concern now about the gallbladder, so we're hoping that the gallbladder will be considered within normal range, the enzyme levels, because we don't want surgery. He really is not at a place
Right.
where he can have some surgery. But
Right.
he is enjoying being home with his family. Darren is a very, very much family man. He's got, his wife and 5 children. So he missed them while he was away, and they missed him. So he's enjoying being home with his family. And today is their anniversary, Angie and Darren's. So they've been married 17 years. So and I know I talked to her yesterday for a short time and to wish her happy anniversary, and she's just thankful that he is here, to share another year with her.
Yes, yeah. Well, I certainly have liked him a great deal. I think he's just a wonderful person who's contributed a great deal to who we are as a culture of faith, and I appreciated. I tell you, when I read his book, The Misunderstood God, I so much of it resonated with me. and I like the book, and I highly recommend that people. It's not. I wouldn't call it a deep theological work or something. It's really he's sharing his thoughts about the contradictions that we seem to have in the way we understand and define God, and particularly the problem of even the institutionalized church. But you might actually be able to tell us a little bit more for the listeners who may not know what the Free Believers Network is. Could you give us kind of a summary of that?
Okay, that's Darren's ministry, which he started, I don't know, a number of years ago when he began to understand about the love of God. That really is what Darren's main ministry is, sharing with people the love of God, that God loves you no matter what. There's no conditions to God's love. He just loves us. So, he started that ministry to try to get people to understand there's so much guilt and so much condemnation put on us through some institutional teaching. And so Darren wanted to come against that so that people would be free. There's so much bondage in the church because we're constantly being told, and in the Bible it says we were set free from a sin consciousness, but in religion, the emphasis is on sin. Where in the in Darren's message is not, the emphasis is not sin, but it's God loves you,
Hmm.
and that's what he wanted to get to the people. This all began when Darren was a pastor in a mega church in Arizona. And as he puts it, he says he fell in love with the people. He spent time with each member in his group. He was a pastor of the singles group. So he spent time with each member of his group and he fell in love with them. And from that love that he felt for them, the love for his family, for his wife and his children, he began to understand what God's love is for us. And that's what he really shares with us. So that's how he started the Free Believers Network. And he also wanted it to be a place where people could get together, not dependent on him, but to begin to connect with one another and to share our journeys with one another. So it's more of like a network. He set it up right where the emphasis is, he doesn't want the emphasis to be on him, but upon God's love and our connections with the rest of the body of Christ.
Yeah, and he has a network blog and the shows where he's got you can get MP3s of yeah, I guess is can you give me the website again for his
Yeah, well, the website is the Free Believers Network. If you Google that you'll come up
yeah,
with
sure,
the
right,
website. And on there, he's got some blogs that he's written. Unfortunately, he's actually been ill for a number of years, even
yeah,
before he was hospitalized. So his writing, he was just couldn't do that. So the blogs are probably a couple of years old. Still great information, but a couple of years old.
yes,
Excuse me. He's got some podcasts that he's done.
right,
Again, they're pretty old. The last one he did was the day before he went in the hospital,
right,
and so that they're 5 6 months old. And I talked to him several months ago. He's eager to get back to doing podcasts. He would like to do one. He says the first one he does probably going to be 10 minutes because he just can't do it anymore. But he wants to just
yeah,
let people know
yeah,
how much he loves them and how thankful he is for the prayers and the support he's gotten from the people who have, other believers. He's gotten a
yeah,
lot of love. He and Angie. It was difficult for Angie, especially at the beginning, because really they put him to sleep when he was in
mhm,
the hospital.
yes,
The first
I
3 or
heard,
4 weeks, he was probably asleep, so he didn't know what was going on. But Angie did,
yeah,
and she felt a lot of love and support from the people, and that really strengthened her to be able to do what she had to do without his input and without his support. And then just stressed about him, was he going to make it? And so, everybody, the family is real thankful for the love that they received.
yeah. No, even some of the details are just too medical to necessarily even talk about here. But I think it would be important for people to know that Darren has been through a real rough time of it. And I'm so thankful that there are people in Darren and Angie's life that have stepped up to the plate to help out. I hope that they continue to do that. And anyhow, and I can relate to your story there. Many, we have this phrase we call it pastor's heart. And I don't think it's always used in a way that represents what it ought to. But I can identify that when you discover how genuinely lovely human beings are, and how vitally lovely they are, it has to sometimes bring you to questions of some of the traditional attitudes about what God thinks of us as human beings. Anyhow,
Yeah.
so let's move on now to something you didn't always start out. You weren't born in the Free Believers Network. There was a time when you became a person of faith. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Okay. Well, when I was born, my mother had been Baptist. My father was Roman Catholic. We went to the Roman Catholic Church, not very regularly, but we went there. But my heart, for some reason, as a child, was always leaning towards the Baptist. I guess what little my mother used to sing, some of the hymns at home, and I just could not relate to the Latin. When I was in Roman Catholic, they spoke in Latin, and I could not relate to all that ceremony that they did. And then in high school, I met a friend. She was Baptist, so she invited me to go to her church. So I started attending her church on a regular basis. Um, I got to admit, my understanding really was very limited then, though I did, pray the sinner's prayer when the pastor's wife came up and kind of cornered me and asked me if I was ready to accept Jesus. I really had no idea what she was talking about, but I said yes. And so I prayed the sinner's prayer with her and then went through the motions of being a Christian. But it was years later when I was married that all of a sudden it was just like the whole world opened up to me, the whole world of God, and I began to finally understand what it meant to be His child, to be His daughter, and that's when I made a commitment, and I actually believe that people, I still go to a church, and it bothers me when they say, ask Jesus into your heart, because to me it's believing. I don't see where we're supposed to ask Jesus to do it. I just think it's a simple belief, and that's where I came to where I actually believed, and I finally understood, and I made a decision that and accepted it, that this was true for me, and so that I did as a teenager. Um, life life didn't get any easier as a believer. It was stressful, it was difficult, very hard. In a lot of ways, I was alone as a child. As a believer, raising my children, in my home. But I continued on, get very serious about church. I was very active in the church, always have been very active in the church. And that grew, did all the religious things, read my Bible, tried to pray, did all that. So it was a tough journey as a believer. I don't know that I ever would say it was easy. Some people say they had a honeymoon time. I don't know if I ever did. But
Uh-huh.
I, I entered into it as best I could, followed all the rules as best as I could. Tried to read my Bible every day, tried to pray, very active in the church always. So, like I said, I became a believer as a teenager, struggled my way through, but I continued on as best I could. Plodding along is how I would put it.
Yeah.
It was never easy.
Now, it sounds to me like part of what you're also sharing with us, though, is that it isn't as if there was always this clear sense of exactly where the road was, and that even though you're on the road you're on now, it's not as if it's because, well, everything, all these ducks are in a row and everything. You continue to go to church. Um, I'm curious about how you then got involved with the Free Believers Network. And I think what was one of their phrases, returning the church to its natural environment, is it something like that?
Right. Well, in between, there was an incident which I guess we'll get into a little bit later, where I did go to an abusive church, um, and part of that, one of the things is when I finally left that church, my eyes were finally open. That things were not the way they were being portrayed in the institutional church. I saw that there was a lot of things that just didn't line up for me. And I
Yeah.
was kind of confused as to how, I said, well, what is truth? What does this mean for me? So I began a search what probably everybody else did, started Googling some stuff. And the first person I wound up with was Wayne Jacobson from Livestream and The God's Journey. And I got involved with, his forum, became a member there. And then some woman posted a link to the first 3 online chapters of a book about God is Love. And so I read that, and I said, "Oh, sounds interesting." So I read the first chapter, and I said, "Oh my goodness, this is unbelievable! I have got to get this book. I'm not going to waste my time reading anymore. I've got to get the book." But she didn't say much about it. But I Googled it and found out the name of the book was "The God's Honest Truth," and the author was Darren Hufford. The God's Honest Truth is the original version of the Misunderstood God, which Darren had written when he was the pastor of the church. So I wrote him to get a copy of the book. And I'm the type of person, I just can't say, "Please send me a book." I've got to say, "Oh, I love the book. It was great. It changed my life," all that sort of stuff. I get kind of flowery. So I said all that to him. And he gave me the information about getting the book. And then he said, "Call me," and gave me his phone number. And I thought, "Oh, this guy's just saying this." So I just ignored him. And then later on, I needed to get another book because I got into this habit of writing to him periodically saying, "Send another book and send it to another person." And I would have him send it to a friend who I felt needed the book. And then again, he finally said to me, "Call me." So I said, So I called him finally. I said, "I don't know what this guy wants. I don't know what we're going to talk about." But I called him, and then we just started talking after that ever so often, and we got to be friends. And then I asked him, I said, "What is this Free Believer Network? And how do you be?" Because I saw his website. At that point, his website was nothing like it is now. It was just basically a page where he sold products and had a few sermons, but that was it. And I said to him, "Well," and he had mentioned something about the Free Believers Network. I said, "How do you become a member of this Free Believers Network?" He said, "Well, you were a member when you joined, and when you when you emailed me the first time." So anyway, he and I got to be friends, and then he started the new website. And I knew he was going to start the website. He also told me there was going to be a forum on the website, which I thought, I had seen some Christian forums already, and I thought, I don't know if this is such a good idea. And I told him my opinion of Christian forums, and he said, "Well," he says, "if it ever gets to that place, he would shut it down." And so, but he told me there was a forum, so I said, "Okay, I don't know if I'm going to join or not." But anyway, when he opened the forum, when the website came up, it was what we have now, what you see now, if you go to the Free Believers Network. And the forum was there, and I did wind up joining, got to be friendly with his moderator at that point. And she asked me, if she felt she needed some help, if I would consider being an assistant moderator. I said, "Well, yeah, I've never done anything like that before. My online experience was pretty slim." But I agreed to it. And then when she decided a few years ago she couldn't do it anymore because of family issues and she just got too busy, I started moderating the forum. So I moderate the forum on the Free Believers Network website. So I do that on his page. And just a good friendship has developed between me, Darren, and Angie. And I've been to see them a few times, just have enjoyed them as people. Just like you said, he's an amazing, amazing person, a lot of wisdom. And so I've gotten involved in helping him as in any way I can. He knows I'm available to do whatever I can to help him, but I do moderate the forum, and that's my primary responsibility.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. I want to go back to something you had mentioned earlier, and I'm not interested in bad mouthing anyone, but I'm curious. You mentioned before that you had been to this other church for a while that you found to be rather abusive, but not necessarily mentioning names. I mean, what sort of could define some of that abuse and explain what sort of abuse you saw there? What
Okay,
what stuck out?
okay. Well, when I got there, it was there just didn't seem, there was something wrong. I could tell almost from the beginning there was something wrong there. Part of the main thing, of course, is the pastor was very controlling. And he did badmouth the other churches. He was at that point, it was a member of a denomination. That particular church was part of a denomination, and he badmouthed the leadership of the church. He badmouthed the other denominations, and it was it was the idea that we had something that nobody else had. That was the
Mhm.
feeling that he was promoting. Um, he also made a lot of quick changes. It was a small country church, and people were kind of settled there. And the church had been around before, but he went in there and immediately started changing things without asking anybody. Like one thing, he did was he knocked, and this happened before I got there, he knocked down some wall. And that may seem small, but when you got people who are kind of settled, things like that
Mhm.
um, do get people upset. And he would just do whatever he wanted to do. And then, abusive churches, they don't just come at the very beginning and throw it all out. It's a gradual building up of abuse and control. There was a problem with the finances. Um, there was nobody to check on the finances, and it was rumored that he spent freely and kind of took some of the money, which it looks like he did, because he and his wife lived much more elaborately than you would assume coming from a small church. So there was
Mhm.
problems with the finances. Where were they going? He stopped programs, like he had started cell groups, and I was a cell group leader. Well, he stopped it overnight. I mean, like one day he said, "This is it," and that was his way. He kept you off balance. Um, and then there was favoritism, a lot of favoritism, and especially with the young Christians and the children, the ones who were not mature enough to recognize there was a problem. I've been a believer for a long time, so I knew there was something wrong there. I could
Wow.
tell. Um, but the young children and the new believers, they didn't have the wisdom and the maturity to recognize that there was something wrong there.
Well,
And things,
that's quite a list so far of what you're saying here. I mean, we talk about a controlling, kind of an exclusivity to the group, the arbitrariness of the way he handled things, financial accountability. Talking about keeping things people off balance, and then having favorites. That that's a lot of things going on, and I got to be honest with you. Certainly not all organizations are behaving in that manner, but it is amazing to me just how many are. And these are behaviors that I don't know if you're comfortable with this, but I am comfortable labeling it as cultic. um,
right.
we these Many of these Bible believing churches like to define cults as these people who are preaching these other gospels and teaching these other heretical doctrines, but they rarely take a look at the concept of being cultic as having to do with a style of leadership and a style of maintaining a certain control over the church. And I get the impression from the Free Believers Network that this is something very important to a part of their message. Am I under the right impression with that?
Right. Yeah. If you, a lot of, I was amazed because, when the first podcast I did with Darren was on spiritual abuse, he wanted me to talk about spiritual abuse because that's one of the things that
Mhm.
I have focused on. So I talked about spiritual abuse, and I was amazed at people contacting me about the
Yeah.
fact that they had been spiritually abused. And some people had said to me, I never knew I was spiritually abused. They didn't not even recognize it until I started talking about it and saying,
Yeah.
just like you're saying, what are some of the signs that you've been spiritually abused? And yeah, it is. Some it's been very extreme. Some of the abuses, some of the people have gone through has been very, very extreme. Others have not been quite as dramatic, but still, yeah, that is part of the system,
I think that is
unfortunately.
yeah,
And
that's
even in the
important
better
pointing out.
churches, there can be some.
Mhm. That's important what you're pointing out there, that a great number of people, and I think I had Lisa Bertolini. I don't know if you know who she is. Many people know her as Sister Lisa. I had her on my show here once, and she focuses a great deal on spiritual abuse. But even there was this common theme of a lot of people who are under this spiritual abuse. don't realize it.
Right.
And I think that in many ways people who become Christians are oftentimes looking for something that seems authentic, and in their search for authenticity in a spiritual relationship, they're not necessarily interested in becoming critical thinkers who are going
Mm.
to really, fine tune and investigate and consider all the things going on. And as a result, out of their desire to be to loyally pursue, I think that many times they just push away all those pestering questions. I find it interesting that not only do they not know it, it's interesting also that you point out that when you first got to that other church, you knew something was wrong, but but you hadn't really nailed it down, and yet you were there. What do you think was the main reason why you continued going, even though you thought there was something? Because I think it's a very common thing. You knew something was off, but yet you were still going. What do you suppose was behind that?
Well, for me, like I said, I had been a believer probably maybe 20 years or more when I got involved with this church. And of course, the pastor, he was an amazing teacher. Some of the things that Darren teaches, actually, he was teaching.
Hmm.
Of course, he taught some stuff that was definitely off too. This particular pastor. I mean, some of the stuff he said was off, but some of it he wasn't. It was quite true. And it got to a place I absolutely hated going. Oh, golly, I absolutely hated going. And so I decided a couple of times I was going to stop going, but it just seemed like God said no. And I'm not
Hmm.
putting this as a normal thing, but for me, God wanted me to stay there. And I knew that
Yeah,
because I decided several times I'm out of here. I can't stand this place
yeah,
because I could see the craziness, the favoritism, and of course I wasn't one of the favorites, but I was ready to leave, but it was just like God saying, "No, I want you to stay here."
huh.
So I
Did you?
stayed 3 years.
Oh, yeah. I can identify with that because I actually remained in a church that I had grown uncomfortable with it, but I remained there for about 5 years. Uh, and for a couple of reasons myself. Uh, Not that they had a dynamic personality like what you seem to be talking about, but I also felt that I wanted to see two things. I wanted to see if I could make a difference, and I also
Right,
wanted to see if it made any difference. And I also was going through a phase where I was trying to see if I could find a way of being an acceptable person in this church, even though I was a person who was, not toting the party line. And I think I did pretty well. But I think that my wife was also very accurate in telling me that one of the reasons why I got away with being so non-traditional, even though I was uncomfortable there, was because the church I was at one time their worship leader, and I was really the only professional musician who was attending there, and they sort of needed me, and so I think it actually gave me a little more license and leeway to be the person who could say, well, I don't know if I can go along with that, or I don't share that view, and although it did get to the point where they wouldn't let me teach Sunday school too
right,
much,
right.
but
They
yeah,
find
so
ways.
I did finally, though, 5 years down the road, I came to the conclusion finally that there's nothing I can really do here, and I'm not getting anything out of it, and I'm certainly not finding it the sort of thing that is feeding my soul. But I did find that I was able to be there without feeling accosted. It was it was not the sort of a place that brought me down. Yeah, I had a rather healthy faith on, independent of that. So what have you. But anyway, I'm curious.
Yeah,
So you see, you've talked about other people though who came from some more seriously abusive places. Again, without necessarily naming names, what sort of practices did you find in some of the most extreme situations?
well, one of my friends actually ended up living with the pastor, and traveling with her. And by the way, it was a woman pastor, so women
Oh, okay.
pastors
Yeah.
can get abusive. It's not just men, but she wound up living with this pastor, separated herself from her family. Now, that's another thing that some of them do. They separate you from your family and your friends and isolate you just with their little group. And that happened to this particular friend. Um,
Yeah.
and finally, with this particular woman, her daughter was involved, but her daughter got married and her husband took the daughter out. And then they waited and prayed for the mother to leave, and finally she left too. But that was real extreme, living with the pastor and traveling with the pastor and stuff like that. In the church I was involved with, one couple felt that they were forced to get married. Um, and well, particularly the girl, she felt she was forced to get married to the man. Um, and that marriage, of course, never worked out. And eventually they
Mm,
got a divorce. That was one thing the pastor's wife was like to do is matchmake, and match people up. So stuff like that. Of course, it was just money. Oh, in the church I went to, he ripped some of the members off out of
yeah.
money. And they were able to recoup some of it by, getting some of the possessions that he had used. They were able to get that the car, taken back by the bank. So they were able to take care of that, but some of the money they just lost. So he did stuff like that. And one of the members he cheated out of money was a widow,
Oh,
older widow. So it's stuff like that, just extreme abuse that with no conscience at all.
yeah.
I sometimes wonder how. And with this particular man, and I don't know, I just think would think, how could he do this to God's people?
Hmm.
And then I just honestly felt that he was angry at God. He knew he couldn't get back to God. So how do you get back to God? You hurt his children. And that's
Yeah.
how I felt with this particular man. I don't know if any others do, but I wonder sometimes if that's some of the reasons why some of these pastors get so abusive and so hurtful. I mean, it's really sad when you see, with this pastor and others I've heard, keeping you at church hour after hour after hour, getting you to the point of exhaustion. That's a biggie. It likes to get you exhausted. So, because when you're exhausted, you can't think.
Right.
And I've seen that happen. Like I saw that happen with him and this other. With they were just so involved in the church, you just don't have time to think any. So there's just so much, um, and it's just total control of
Yeah.
everything. And
You
he
know,
would say things like he wanted the children to come to him and talk to him. Well, I'm thinking, that's taking the place of the parents.
right. I
And
agree
so,
with you. Yeah.
you know, control in every aspect of life,
Yeah.
the extreme forms.
Yes.
And one
Yes.
thing, though, you were talking before, and it came to me that unfortunately the system and what we're taught nowadays is just regular Christianity, not even the abusive kind, sets us up for that. The idea
Yes.
that
Yes.
the pastor is different from the rest of the people of God, that he's above the people of God, that he knows more than the people of God, and that you have to listen, that he's the man of God, and you listen to him.
Hmm.
Uh, that type of teaching, which is all over the church, it's the basis of Christianity.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous teaching.
I
Um,
agree with you. Yes. In fact, I would say that, I've been a pastor of a church. I've been a pastor to more than one. And, the way the role, the responsibility was, as it were, taught to me or explained to me, um, I think opens the pastor up to a great deal of even unknown temptation to become more controlling than one ought to be. Just doing what you think is the right thing to do. And I think it's also important for us to point out we're not talking, you weren't like a member of Heaven's Gate or of Jim
oh
Jones
no,
Church. But
no,
these are
it was
things
a regular
that are
denominational
it's
church.
certainly not talking about all churches,
Hmm.
but that many this is going on in mainstream churches that are on the corner, places you wouldn't think of as being cultic, but I agree with you that the system in some way sets it up. Now, I haven't had a pastoral responsibility in decades personally, but I find that just being a person who shares what I share in the community, I have a number of relationships with people who relate to me in a sense where they look to me for pastoral care, but there's no formal relationship where they're in any manner beholding to me, or they need to be obedient to me. We don't have a congregation where I'm in charge, but more often than not, this has to do with just going through moments of life, sadness, concerns, questions, difficulties with certain situations where I can be a person who sort of in some ways just represents that God is with them and loves them and can assure them of that and what have you. But yeah, I agree with you. It really sets it up. But of course, where I was headed with that is that there's a sense in which now that I'm no longer in that responsibility, I feel that I am doing more of what I really wanted to accomplish as a pastor in that role than I could have ever done personally when I had that as my official title and job.
Right. Yeah, of course, I'm not, never had the position of pastor, but I do feel that, like you, that I have a bit of a pastoral calling. Of course, with the
Hmm.
forum, that kind of is a pastor. I have to kind of watch things, and I don't control things. I let them kind of talk whatever they want to talk, but just like, they can talk about anything they want to talk about. We have atheists who come on. We got, just people trying to explore what it means to be a free believer, and they're free. But people do write to me, do contact me, wanting with questions, just wanting somebody to talk to. I had one person contact me, says, "I need a friend. Will you be my friend?" I said, "Yep, I'll be your friend."
Sure.
And she's a darling. She is a darling. I have
That's
talked to her
sweet.
several times on the phone, and the last time I talked to her, I could see such a dramatic change in her, like she was blossoming, and it was beautiful. So I do get a chance to talk to people about different things. I also have a blog, and the last two blogs I did, and I was talking about calling and what my calling is. And
Mhm.
of course, when you leave the system, and are not as involved in the system, all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, what do I do now? I'm used to teaching, I'm used to singing, I'm used to doing this, I'm used to being a youth leader, I'm used to be doing that. And all of a sudden there's nothing to do, which of course bothered me for quite a while, but then I got kind of used to and comfortable with that. But what I'm coming to see now, of course, now I do different things. Like I said, I moderate Darren's forum. I help him however he needs help.
Mhm.
I have two blogs that I'm not real good about keeping up with, but I still have the two
Yeah.
blogs.
How can people find your blogs?
Okay, well, the first one is called Forgetting the Former Things, which is kind of a
Mhm.
general type of blog about things that are in my heart, grace, love of God, whatever. The second blog is called Setting the Captives Free, and that is about spiritual abuse. And like I said,
Mhm.
that blog has not been updated in a while, just lack of time. But I do have a lot of resources there on setting the captives free that people might want to go through if they feel like they have been in a spiritually abusive situation and would like some encouragement or some resources to help them get out of that. Um, so I do have those two blogs and hopefully get back into keeping that one up a little bit better. But right now, with time, just doesn't seem to be. But I did write the two blogs on calling, and one of the things I brought out in that is that um, I helped me to understand where my calling was, because I had a lot of confusion as to what I was supposed to be doing. In the church, you're supposed to be doing something. This is part of it. You're supposed to be serving God. And I kind of wondered, I said, well, I'm not doing anything. But I was just fine. I finally came to realize that my calling is to just love and encourage the people who are outside of the church, outside the religious system. And so those are the people I have most contact with through my blogs, through the Free Believers Network. I've made a lot of good friends through that. Facebook, or people who don't go to church or maybe are struggling with their church. And I just encourage them is basically what I do. Um, Share
Very
my
good.
experiences, any thoughts that I might have if they feel that they need that, but just there to be a sounding board to let them share their heart. Because when you're in the system, a lot of times there's nobody to talk to. That's a biggie.
Isn't
And
that
you start to
amazing? You're
think,
in the system and yet there's nobody to talk to.
yeah, right. Because you see everybody just kind of going along and seemingly happy with the way things are. And you're not. And you start to think, there's something wrong with me.
Hmm.
And it helps when they either find my blog or find the Free Believers Network and they find, oh, I'm not the only one. And they realize that the problem is not with them, but it's the system that's the problem. Because,
Very
when you're,
often, these people who think there's a problem, what's wrong with me? They're not giving themselves enough credit to recognize there's something wrong here. Not
exactly,
necessarily me.
exactly. And if you try to
Now,
talk to other people, in the system, if they're system people, they're going to tell you that you're the problem and that you need to
yeah,
line up.
because they're dedicated to the system. They're not necessarily dedicated to the value of the person, but to the value of the system itself. Now, which brings me to a question that I think that you could also address. You certainly, I've heard you talk about the idea of getting out of the system, but that has more to do with a framework of thinking than it does with your actual connections and with organizations. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I go to church. As a matter of fact, I went to church this morning. I'm not real regular in church. I don't go to the extent I used to. I used to be there when the door opened. I don't anymore. I go to what I feel is beneficial. And the last few Sundays, well, there was a lot of different reasons. It was just busyness, and then one Sunday, actually, I was sick. But so I have not been going regularly, but I do go pretty much every Sunday. I go to the social stuff because my feeling is the reason you go to church is to connect with the people.
I
So I go
agree.
to some social stuff of people, as a group our age, the 55 and above, they call us. So we go to that. My husband and I will go to that, and I get to know the people. They're just wonderful people. I really enjoy them. But the idea is, I don't fit in. My
Hmm.
thoughts and my beliefs are totally different than they were when I was actively involved. I don't think the same way they do. I don't think about
Yeah.
anything the same way that they do. And I'm okay, now I realize it's okay. It's okay
Mhm.
for me to think the way I think. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm getting set free from that mindset that we all have to be little clones, or as I put it, cookie cutter Christians, where we all have to
Hmm.
think the same and act the same. It's okay to be me, however
Yeah.
me shows up. Now, I'm not saying we need to be obnoxious
No.
and self-centered and unsensitive, but it's okay for me if I wake up that morning and I don't feel like going to church. It's okay not to go. It's okay for
Yeah.
me not to be active in the things that they feel I need to be active in. And
Sure.
it's okay also for me not to believe what they believe.
Right.
I go to Presbyterian church. I don't believe the way they believe.
Right.
I go
Well,
because
it
we
sounds
like.
you're taking responsibility for your own conclusions while still remaining connected with people. I used to think of myself sometimes as I'm kind of a missionary of the love of God, and my mission field was the church that I attended.
I know.
That's kind of a little bit arrogant, and I didn't do that in an arrogant way. I tried not to. But the truth is, when you're involved with some sort of a fellowship or with people, you're really involved in other people's lives where there are going to be many opportunities for you to be the love of God to these people, the skin of Jesus,
Right.
and ways in which your interaction with them does help them to embrace the idea that they are genuinely love-worthy people, truly loved by God. I'm curious. We're coming up to where we have like about 7 minutes left to this show. Is there anything that you would feel is important that people should think in terms of in identifying the cultic behaviors that could exist even in some of these mainline churches? Some tips or some signals that you'd want to give to people for them to consider?
Well, I think people need to be willing to think for themselves. I think that's the important thing. To listen to your heart. if you feel that there's something not quite right, there's probably something not quite right.
Hmm.
Even in the best of churches, you will see some of that behavior. Um, Maybe the emphasis is too much on money. That could be it. Um, and I think in all of them the emphasis is too much on money. That's my personal opinion. Um, the idea that they want to build a big church, a big group. They want to be a mega church. Well, that's just not normal. Mega churches, people get lost in mega churches. When the emphasis is that the pastor's always right or the leadership's always right, and you cannot speak freely what's on your heart without feeling condemned, um, being isolated, like I said, that's a biggie. They try to isolate you. I think one of the important things is for the body to stay together. Um, and this is honestly some things that disturbing me, even about people I see online who would call themselves free believers. This separation from the rest of the body of Christ, that I think is unhealthy. I
I
think we
agree.
need to stay connected to one another, even to the traditional believers. They're still part of the body of Christ. We
Exactly.
may not agree with them, and they may be kind of aggravating in some ways, but we can't distance ourselves. And I think that's a biggie in the cults. They want to separate you from everybody else. And I think when you start seeing that, you better be really, really careful when they start saying, we have the truth and no one else has the truth. That is, you better start, red flags better start going up right then and there, because the truth is not in one particular person or in one particular group. The truth is spread out throughout the entire body of Christ.
We have a viewer comment that had actually come in here that I'd like to mention here. Let's see, a viewer comment. They come into me through the SMS here. This is a great discussion. I came out of an abusive church myself, says this viewer. I don't go to church anymore. I love the social aspect, but for me, it's just not worth being able to express my own opinion without condemnation. It I want to thank the viewer for that comment. The question I was going to ask you next is, um, so and I agree with you that the people in the institution or outside of the institution, these are all people who are part of the body, and I don't think that, and I would also agree with you that institutionalization is more a mindset. I think that in order for people to get things done, and we were discussing this earlier, that you do need to be organized. But when the
Right.
organization becomes a substitute for your own independent responsibility, then there's some serious problems. Where would you say, what sort of lines would you say we need to draw? When is it time to go? Even when it's okay to be part of it. I stayed there for a long time, and I didn't have a problem being there. I wasn't getting a lot out of it, but it finally came time for me to go. When would you say it's time to go?
Right. But like you, I stayed, and honestly, I can say that I had no lasting effects from it. But I think when you start feeling yourself, um, that your opinions are being devalued, you're being put down, and when you feel yourself being, when you feel it's more destructive to you to stay there
Mhm.
than it is to leave, I think it's time to leave. As soon as you see yourself starting to question your beliefs, starting to feel like you're being belittled, it's time to hit the road. Or when you feel that it's your family is being separated, you're being separated from your family. I think in most cases, most people need to leave pretty quick. Um,
Mhm.
from what I've experienced, most people are not like you and me. We had a depth, and I think for me and maybe for you too, God allowed us to stay there as long as we did because He wanted us to be that voice to people to see.
Yeah.
Because I was kind of thick, I didn't see anything, so I was able to stay longer. But my opinion, people need to leave pretty quick for the most part. Not everybody, but I would not recommend as a normal rule to stay. When you start seeing that destructive behavior and it starts really affecting you, it's time to hit the road.
Yeah.
I recognized that for me, it was time to hit the road when I started getting scared at some of the things he was saying. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this guy is really getting crazy. Then I knew it was time to hit the road. when he was talking about seeing strange people in the back, don't let your children go outside, and this, I'm thinking, this is weird. So
Uh,
I knew it's time for me to hit the road. And at that time, I left.
one of the things that I found interesting that I can relate to, and one of the things you're saying here is that I found myself aggravated with some of the notions and ideas that were there, and I did speak up. And I, I remember one time I had been speaking up and saying something, and was actually teaching something in a Sunday school class, and somebody who wasn't there had asked another person, "Oh, what did Bob Graves talk about?" And they told me later that the answer they got was, "Oh, Bob." It was rather aggravating. And
Yes,
I
you.
realized, when people are of different paradigms, we can easily find each other aggravating. But I did find it helpful to be a part of that, to seek to find out just to what degree I can remain connected. And I still try to stay as connected to all the people that I can, both in and out of the institution, just as being connected as people. Well, Aida, I want you to know I'm so glad we got a chance to chat with you and get to know you a little bit. We are actually now out of time. We talked a
Oh,
long time ago about having you on here, and I'm glad it's finally happened. I hope that when you do have an opportunity to extend to Darren, that you let him know that I love him, I care about him, and that I'm hoping for the very best for him and his family. And I want to thank you so much for all that you're doing, and particularly with my concern for today's show, helping me talk about the fact that even within some of the mainstream churches, we do have situations where there's some kind of cultic abuse going on. And so I appreciate your voice and your sharing some of your own experience in that. And with that, we're really just going to have to call it there. And I will see you people back here on Wednesday. Until then. And thanking you, Aida Calder. This is Bob Graves, the Unconventional Pastor. I'll see you much later. Take care. Bye.
thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed The Unconventional Pastor with Bob Graves and his delightful guest, Aida Calder. And we hope you didn't find Bob to be too aggravating. Stay tuned. In just a moment, Dr. Jones will be up on stage, and I think that he might be less aggravating than Bob was. Don't leave us.